Subscribe and click on the bell icon to be the first to see the latest videos.
Welcome Mr. Raghava, Vice President Finance and India CFO Amazon. Please welcome Raghava.
Introducing myself, I head finance for Amazon in India, and I've been in my role for the last 5 years. And before that, I used to work in Hindustan Unilever, where I worked for a fairly long period of time. Next slide, please. We don't have a clicker, so you'll have to pardon the clumsiness of this. So I'm going to start this session on finance actually with a quote from biology. And hopefully this is a quote or a sentence that all of you. It comes from one of the foundational leaders of biology, Charles Darwin, who in his book and famous thesis, The Natural Selection, called out that it is not the strongest of the species that survive, nor is it the most intelligent. What Darwin said, the species that will survive is actually the one that is most adaptable for change. So remember that. It's a species that are the most adaptable to change that will continue to survive on this planet, and not the ones who are the strongest at any point of time, or even the most intelligent. The same lesson applies to corporate world, where organizations that are able to adapt themselves very quickly to the changes around them are the ones that are going to survive. So I'm going to show a picture of 3 products which are fairly iconic at one point of time. Yeah? The film camera is something you barely see these days. It's completely become extinct. The concept of photography lives on, but the mode of capturing images on a film camera is completely obsolete. And any organization that builds its future on film production, probably like Kodak, does not survive to see today. It would have been impossible to walk into any office and not see a Remington typewriter. Such great was the ubiquity of this particular office device. But you don't see that anymore. And typically, every teenager thought it was very cool to have a Walkman with him or her. But you don't see that product at all now. In just a matter of about 20 years or so, these products are completely disappeared. So what does this mean, and where does the change or the inflection point really come from, and what lessons does it have for many of us who are in finance roles or thinking of finance technology at this point of time? Okay. So we just celebrated the 50th anniversary of humankind's most awesome achievement, which is actually setting a human being on the moon, and the mission that made it possible, I think it was Apollo 11. Was powered with a computer which is actually considered breakthrough at that point of time. But are you guys aware that the typical average smartphone that you have with you, and not even the latest smartphone, actually is more than 1 million times, 120 million times actually to one particle, more computing power than the spaceship that actually powered Neil Armstrong. Just take a minute to savor this piece of information. The power of computing has become so ubiquitous, you can carry it in your pocket, that it really has the potential to transform industries. It's just that industries are not found uses for digitization, and some of my talk is going to focus on that. But that's really what is happening with the external ecosystem. So how do you go about designing finance for a new world, for a digital world? And I thought I'm actually well placed, because I worked for a long period in Hindustan Unilever, a very well-respected organization, but I consider that still a very analog organization. And then I moved about 5 years back to Amazon, which I consider a very digital and a very tech organization operating in the tech industry. What are some of the things that I have learned which I think are pretty important? So I think data and digitization is at the heart of what is the difference between these two organizations. And if you were to map out some changes for your respective organization, I would actually say you would go through these 5 steps. And I'll just walk you through some of these 5 steps. And I've used the mnemonic of the evolution of a man from an ape or a primate to actually call out what is important. In this process, I consider the first two steps as very basic. They are hygiene. They are necessary but not sufficient for you to change your organization into a digital organization. The big flip comes from the last three steps that I call it. So what are the first and the second step? The first step is basically designing or thinking through what is the data that you will capture in your organization. Typically, many of us have grown up in organizations where most of the data that is referred to as being captured is actually financial transactions. It's just your purchase order being raised, or the payments that are happening, or the invoices that are being generated in the organization. That's the way we think our sales data in the organization or cost of manufacturing data is the way we think about that data. And because typically data is being equated with financial data, it is the finance team that is the gatekeeper to what the data in the organization. So not very long back, I used to work in teams where if a certain report used to be circulated to other leadership functions, it was assumed that finance would have the responsibility as quote-unquote MIS managers for the organization. It served the organization well at that point of time because finance is well acknowledged as having the comfort to handle MIS, and it also ensures the integrity of data that is being reported. But I submit to you that if an organization has to evolve, you cannot have finance being the gatekeeper to the data that is being captured in your organization. The right design for an organization is where actually data that is captured is put into a very central data warehouse. Think of it as a central pond in which a lot of data exists. And then different functions, and not just finance, actually has access to pick up that data without going through finance or any function as a gatekeeper in the organization. So that's the architecture that you need to move towards. And if you think that you need to move towards that architecture, it's pretty common sense to then think that this data can't just be financial data. You have to think of what are the other data that you could capture that would be of relevance for different functions. And maybe we'll come back to that a little later on. Now, having done that, and visually think of it as a data pond that has been created in the organization, where different teams then freely dip into to extract and use that data. I think the most important thing we need to put in place, and it's often people lose sight of it, is security and protocols for accessing that particular data. As an example, customer information is something which is hugely confidential. Anything to do with the financial health of your organization is something which is very confidential. However, there may be other data points that is there in the data pond, which may not really be as sensitive as elsewhere. I think it's very important for the finance leader to work with the other business leaders to define what are the operating protocols for different people to access that data and to make sure that the right InfoSec culture prevails in the organization. There's one very simple example that I can share from my experience. In Amazon, like any tech company, you do have a team which takes care of customer support. Yeah? So that team receives calls from customers who on phone identify themselves by giving their order number or maybe address or phone number, and they then have a specific problem to solve. Yeah? This particular team, because of the nature of the job, has to have access to a certain small set of customer data. But the way we have built the organization, including the hardware and the physical access to flows, is that people who have nothing to do with this particular team which serves customers cannot walk into that floor. I mean, it's a very simple protocol. So I, despite my position or whatever, do not get access to actually walk it into that particular floor. And none of our security systems are designed, and none of our information systems are designed for me or anyone else to sort of pry in, saying, okay, I have a friend XYZ who looks in Bombay. I just want to check in into his personal history. It's just not possible. Our architecture just does not support it. So I think things like these are hugely important, and you can take them as granted once you build them. But if you haven't built them, they will come back and bite you. So these are the first two steps that I would actually call out as something which is hugely important on this particular journey. I think then the fun starts, so as to say. I think, and I'll walk this through a few examples. Once you've got data and you've built your tools, your capability to actually dip into that data and extract it, there's a lot of insights that you will draw. Yeah? And organizations never lack insights. But the next part is really important. How do these insights get covered into action? And actually what's important after that is really not just action, but can you predict something before it is going to happen using your past trends of data? And I'll walk you through some examples of that particular thing. But remember this diagram and this particular framework, the first two steps are creating the basic, making sure that you have hardware and protocols to capture all the information, and your different business leaders in the organization are able to dip into it very easily. And then you then see whether from those, the data that's there, can you derive any insights, and do you have the organization capability to quickly convert that insights into action, and do you then have the algorithms to actually go into prediction? So, and I'll walk you through some examples of that. But before we go there, I thought this quote is something that I really love, and I'm very sure all of you have probably heard the first part of the quote. In fact, it's almost like a slogan these days. Information is the oil of the 21st century. But most people don't pay attention to the second part, which I think is more important than the first part, that analytics is the combustion engine of an organization. And at some point soon, data will become a commodity. It is freely available. Of course, you will ring fence it, but it would be freely available. And I think what then differentiates organization is how are you placed to extract and do something out of that data. So as finance leaders, I think we should be building better combustion engines. That is what is going to differentiate different organizations. It may not just be access to data, which will pretty much come to a situation where we will all be drowning in data. So how do you build a better combustion engine using analytics? Based on my experience, there are three building blocks for this journey, and I'll just walk you through the three of them. And I call these three building blocks the building blocks for tool, the building blocks for the business model of the company. And remember, the business model also changes when you look at data and the power of digitization. And then the soft part about what is the culture in the organization. I'm going to talk you through examples for each three of them. First, let's start with tools. Yeah? Tools are, I mean, what as I said, you would soon be drowning in data once you've organized and you've collected all kinds of information. What tools would you use? We often use the word artificial intelligence, and we often use the word machine learning. In fact, these are very common these days. So I'll take a minute to make sure that you really understand what's the difference between machine learning, and I prefer the word machine learning to artificial intelligence, it's more specific to this conversation, versus traditional computing. Traditional computing is something, as the block diagram on the left indicates, you've got a lot of input, you've got a computer which has a program that is loaded, and it could be just a calculator. And the program and the computer will tell you, basis the input, if you want to multiply 9 with 7, these are the inputs, the program is the calculator, the hardware is the calculator, it will tell you what the output is. Yeah? This is something that we all understand, and as I mentioned earlier, in the iPhone and the Apollo example, the computing power is something that has grown tremendously. Machine learning is slightly different, and if you don't understand this block diagram should be very helpful. So in machine learning, you take previous history in the organization, whatever is available to you because your organization is now digitized, of all input and output patterns in it. And then you look for a correlation between the input and the output, and that becomes the program. That program is then what you load back into your traditional computing, and that tells you what the output is. Yeah? So that's now, if that's sounding like a lot of jargon to you, I'll use a simple example, and I've used this often in some of the talks that I've given. One of the problems in the e-commerce industry is returns and rejects. Yeah? About half the business, that's what media probably talks about, is placed as cash on delivery. And in cash on delivery, there's a very high percentage of rejects that happen. So the e-commerce company sends, somebody orders online and says that they will pay cash on delivery. You dispatch all the way from your fulfillment centers or your warehouses to the person's doorstep, probably a few hundred kilometers, incurring a lot of cost and money. And the person says, sorry, I've changed my mind by the time it comes in, and it's normal human behavior of buyer remorse. And then the e-commerce company has to take that stuff all the way back. So you're incurring cost on forward logistics and backward logistics, And because of this multiple handling, there's a very high probability that the product actually gets damaged. Now the problem statement is, how do you minimize these rejects, etc. Yeah, and there's a lot of detailing that goes into it. So what you would do is, you would capture your previous history in the organization of what were the rejects that you had with various parameters and data attributes. So that's your, what I said on the right hand side, your input and output. The output is for each order level information, whether it was a successful delivery or it was an unsuccessful delivery. The input is the entire data that you've captured for each transaction. And remember, there are millions of transactions happening every day. That data could be the name of the person, it could be the mobile number of the person, it could be the address, and remember the address as typed out, which could be a lot of garbage, by the way. It could be the email address, it could be the PIN code, it could be the IP address, it could be the time of the day, it could be the product, it could be the product price, etc. So you take tons of this data and you run it through your machine learning algorithms for past data, probably millions of these transactions, and then you see correlation beginning to emerge. And you will probably see correlation that people in a particular zip code who place orders at 9 o'clock in the morning and type their address in a particular way, and you can even measure when the address is typed, literally how many milliseconds did the person take to type it, and there's a lot of monkey typing which happens. So basis all of these inputs and past data, you can form correlations that there is, when a particular pattern is found, a particular zip code, the way a person has spelled his name or not spelled their name, or a particular item or a particular price or a particular IP address, there is, I don't know, more than 70% probability that the item is going to be rejected basis your past data. And then basis that information, you then decide whether, when the page load, and remember this decision has to be taken in a millisecond, when the person types the order and the page loads on their web screen or on their app, whether you're going to offer the facility to pay cash on delivery, or you're going to offer them the ability to pay only through a credit card or a debit card. Because you know that if people pay through credit card and debit card, they're more likely not to reject. That's also proven through data. Yeah? But if you indiscriminately may force everyone to use a credit card or a debit card for payment, you will never be able to acquire new customers, because new customers who are new to online commerce almost always start with cash on delivery. Yeah? So you have to be very thoughtful in your algorithms of when do you prevent or don't surface a cash on delivery option for a person, and this is where you use your past data, your computing powers, your algorithms to build a program. That program then, when a person places an order, in the millisecond that it takes after capturing all the information about the name or whatever, etc., decides whether the e-commerce company should give the option to pay on delivery, pay cash on delivery, or should it just be a prepaid option. So that's an example where computing is used to predict and take some actions for an organization. I was also interviewing a candidate from a cab, one of those cab tech companies, and the problem that they were trying to solve for is they collect data about thousands and thousands of customers who place a order for a cab on their app, yeah, and the cab loads up. Now, if they want to build a program for loyalty, they want to be able to segment their customers basis income levels. That's a problem this particular organization was trying to solve for. And what this person said is, the way they solved for this is something pretty interesting. Remember, you can't ask for a customer's income data. Now, that's very intrusive, and even if you did, nobody would give you the right income level. So what this cab company does is it establishes a pattern for each customer about what is the starting point and what is the ending point. And then it dips into the database for another company or another real estate company, where you know that if this is the starting point, the rentals in that area are whatever number it is. And over a period of time, by putting people into slabs, you are able to take this as a proxy, and you find it a very good correlation that the rental, the commercial rentals between your starting point and your ending point indicate perhaps a very good correlation between what your income levels are likely to be. Apparently that's what this company particular found out. And then they were able to surface certain better products, or at least that is what was their thought process. So that's an example of how you're able to use customer data to be able to predict basis past correlation, and you use the word machine learning very often, but this is the heart of what really sort of happens. So that's the tools and capabilities, yeah, about machine learning and how do you leverage whatever you've got in terms of digitized information in your organization, how can you predict action, and what recommendations would you make, and what to expect, what insights do you have, etc. So I spoke about that part. The second part is about the business model that you have in the organization. So there's a very fundamental difference from a finance lens that comes in when you have huge amounts of information. Typically, as finance professionals, we are conditioned to focus our energy on what I would call transaction economics. Yeah? Transaction economics is whenever a sale takes place, in that particular sale transaction, what is my profit margin and how can I maximize my profit margin, which is you increase the revenue and you lower your costs. And your energy in the organization is focused on making sure through marketing, better branding, better customer service or whatever, your revenue that you can charge goes up. And through whatever cost saving programs that you run, the costs come down so that in that transaction that you make, your margin is maximized. And the assumption is that if a company has thousands of these transactions, that multiplied by the margin is what gives you profitability. Now that will always be true and that's right, but there's a different way to look at it. Because you've got information about each customer, you can actually granularly track your cash flows per customer. And not only that, and relate this with what I said earlier, you can actually predict basis certain patterns what your company's cash flows with a customer can be. So as an example, if you want to take a decision whether you want to stock some product in your organization or not, the way we would take that decision is not whether we make a margin on that product, which is really transaction economics, which is important, but not the most important thing. The criteria is customers who bought that product versus customers who didn't buy that product, what is the future cash flow going to look like? And it captures the fact that if you're able to offer that particular product to a customer, even though you might make a loss on that particular transaction, which is the red arrow going down at time t equal to 0, there's a pretty high degree of probability that in the future that customer will come back on a more sticky basis and you will be able to make positive cash flows, and you know this with a high degree of confidence. So that, by the way, explains why we stock diapers on e-commerce websites. Diapers are almost always sold at a loss. They're a very unfriendly thing to serve on e-commerce simply because they're very bulky, very competitive, and you always make a loss on every diaper that you sell. But you know from the data that you have that customers who come to buy diapers, more often than not, and think of it intuitively, are likely to be young mothers who just got a baby in their household, who are not very mobile, and they're probably trying out e-commerce for the first time. And when they love the experience of getting a diaper delivered to their doorstep, often at a good price, they will then come back to the e-commerce site more frequently than somebody who's not bought a diaper. So that, in some sense, gives you a very high confidence framework to perhaps be okay with selling diapers at a loss, because basis the past data, you have a fairly high degree of confidence that the future cash flows coming from a customer acquired through that route is actually going to be net present value positive on cash flows. So I think the point I'm trying to make through this example is your business model needs to be reset to make sure that it is at the center of whatever you're going to do with this lot of data. You are gathering a lot of data. You can continue to operate in a traditional way. But here is a way of taking decisions in an organization about whether diapers should be priced at X or Y, or whether diapers should be sold at all at a loss, simply because you have a framework in your business model that tells you that it makes sense to serve diapers, and that's how the net present value of future cash flows gets maximized. And we know that this is the heart of value creation in finance. Yeah? The third part is culture. So I spoke about tools, I spoke about business models. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about culture, because this is often the point that we miss. You can't just throw a switch and say that my organization has made the journey from an analog organization to a digital organization. I think there are a lot of things that change, and it's a pretty long topic, but I'll just cover this very quickly in a few minutes. Because you've got plenty of information, and there are plenty of small decisions that need to be taken on a daily basis, the operating governance in the company about how decisions are taken becomes really important. In every organization, especially in analog organizations, there are very few decisions that you take. And the organization is wired in such a way that there is a schedule of authorities where you go to the senior most person to take the decision, and the person takes the decision often using gut and instinct, etc. In digital organizations, you could probably be taking decisions every single day. If you have a website, what should be literally the color of the website? What should be the price? Should it be X? Should it be X plus delta? Should it be X minus delta? Or whatever, the way the icons are laid out, those are decisions you could probably take very easily. So how do you take these decisions very quickly and in the right way without slowing down the organization? We use the principle of what is called a two-way doors. We say that all decisions are of two types, one-way door and two-way doors. Two-way doors are decisions where you can reverse. Yeah, you can take a decision, you can reverse if you don't like it, and you can come back. Yeah? So rather than spending your time and energy about whether you should cross the door or not, you actually take the decision, but you should be very good at measuring what is going to happen, whether the decision is a good decision or not, and then be able to reverse it. And one-way doors are decisions which are high-stake decisions, and typically, at least the way we think about it in Amazon, anything which involves customer trust or potential loss of customer trust is always a one-way door decision. Those decisions will always go to the highest levels or the right levels before they get decided. But the frontline team is empowered to take what we would call two-way door decisions, etc. Now the point is, okay, that's pretty basic. All organizations should be doing that, but they don't, and that's the heart of what I'm trying to say. In most organizations, the culture is such that people often, and leaders and the culture is such that people often think it's a loss of face if you have to reverse a decision. Yeah? Every leader, and I'm sure all of us can relate to that experience, will think, I suffer a loss of face in my organization with either my team or my colleagues or my line manager if I'm able to reverse a decision. And therefore there is very high inertia to take any kind of risk at all. But if you're able to take your organization's culture saying it is quite okay to take two-way door decisions and it is quite okay to fail, then you get into a very different culture in the organization where you encourage a lot of risk taking, because a lot of decisions are described as two-way door decisions, and then people are encouraged to take risks, measure what is happening, and call out that they've reversed their decision simply because something did not work out. So it's a pretty subtle point, but it's a very important point of what I have seen as the difference in the two great organizations that I have been fortunate to work for. Now, the other part about culture is often this. I spoke a lot about information and data, and you might all think, and I spoke about analysis and analytics, etc. There's also a risk on the other side that the organization gets paralyzed into doing too much of analysis, and people can't move without data being surfaced. So we are very cautious about this, and we have a sort of an informal rule which says that when we evaluate people as leadership positions, we will also give weightage to the fact that do they have a gut which tells them that, okay, I've got data for maybe 60 or 70%, now I know what I need to know, but I don't have certainty, and I'm okay to taking this call because my instinct tells me that that is right. So it's a little bit different from what I said earlier, but you need to get that balance right between having too much database decisions and at the same time not falling a victim to this analysis paralysis and encouraging your leaders to balance data with intuition. And this is my sort of, in some sense, the ending slide. And I heard this from a senior leader in Amazon when we were discussing about what leaders in the future would be like and what changes should be made in the organization to get people ready for that. And the point was this, and typically we are taught from B schools and MBAs, etc., that as you get senior, your job is to actually manage people, and that's by and large true. Yeah? At a senior level, if you can manage a team of people well, that's probably necessary and sufficient for you to be a good leader. But in the organization of the future, only half your time will be spent in managing people. The other half will actually be spent in managing machines. And by machines, I don't mean robots, I mean algorithms and policies which run on data, etc. So people will have to have a high degree of comfort on being able to interrogate algorithms, yeah, or set policies on data and be able to speak with some comfort on statistics, or look at rows and columns of data to be able to take a call and balance that data with the right degree of judgment. And there will be a lot of automation that will happen, whether it is robotic process automation or algorithms, but people will be managing algorithms, policies, machine learning teams, machine learning programs themselves. And as you grow as you grow senior as a leader, that becomes a very important part of what you need to do. I think that's the end of my talk. Do we have time for questions or, yeah, okay. So thank you very much. I hope you found it insightful. So if there are any questions, I'll take the questions. Thank you otherwise. Yeah.
R.R. Donnelly.
Organization called?
R.R. Donnelly.
Okay.
We are into the ITES BPO space. Very interesting presentation, very insightful. Thank you for that. My question is, in this transformation, as a finance head, many people work on SAP, any ERP platform, and some people are still not into the ERP platform. So you started your talk with how we manage data is very important as to what all you capture is. Yeah. So in your experience, where have you seen the pain, even for organizations which use ERP, which use various reporting tools? Is there still a lot that they need to do in terms of capturing data differently to drive the business? Or where is the pain point even in sophisticated organizations that are on the best ERP platforms?
Yeah, I think ERP platforms were by and large, as all of us know, built around financial and transactional data. That's their basic architecture. Of course, they've changed quite a bit to capture customer information, and then you have offshoots of CRM software, etc. But I think the right way to think is whether you are capturing whatever information you can. In my talk, I often sometimes index on the point, so how do you capture information? The typical thing in an organization is whatever, as finance we understand that purchase order is raised or a purchase requisition is raised. That's how the data journey for financial transactions starts, or a sales order is raised. I can relate a little bit. I remember in my younger days when I was a commercial manager at a manufacturing site at a factory, and by no means was it a very modern factory. I remember going to the shop floor and speaking to the technicians there, and one of the technicians told me something which I found very insightful, stuck in my head. He said over a conversation, and he was an old man, or at least he had probably 20 years, 30 years of experience. He said he could tell by the vibrations of the machine when that machine is going to fail. So he knew that very well. Now if you think about it, and he used his sort of whatever judgment, etc. Now this actually can be captured, and there is an entire body of science, and I'm deliberately giving this example because many of us think of digital companies as tech companies or e-commerce companies, etc. But even in manufacturing on the shop floor, if you can set up through IoT devices, and I know there are a lot of firms that offer those solutions, you can capture the temperature of a machine, you can capture the vibrations and acoustic of a machine, and probably a few other parameters. You can build a database over a period of time which will actually tell you when that machine is more likely to fail. Now you need a lot of data, you need a lot of computing power, and you need algorithms which a company may not be able to generate, so you'll have to go to a service provider who will tell you that. But that's an example where, to answer your question, sorry, in a slightly long-winded manner, I don't think we capture data in the right way unless you go, you think that this is an opportunity for me to capture that data. Yeah? So that's an example where the data exists, but you may not have the IoT devices or whatever, or you may not have invested, and it may not be worthwhile to invest also, by the way, for many organizations. But in some organizations, it may be worth it to invest to capture this data and then harness and exploit it to a business benefit, and nothing to do with e-commerce or technology in this example. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful presentation. My name is Prathamesh Welling, and I'm director with a startup called Magic Institute of Excellence, a training and development company. So we have spoken a lot about the data and the transformation of the data which is going to take place. I have a question which is particularly on the tangent of the data, the balanced data with intuition, the point which you have raised already. So as you said that when we do a lot of leadership hiring, we ensure that people who are coming on the leadership level positions have that gut instinct or their intuition level decision to take. I would be highly obliged if you can share an incidence probably or a case wherein the data was taking the direction or the dimension to some extent, but an intuition level decision for the business which diverted it completely and take up and proven to be a success of the company. Anything which is allowed to share on the open platform if you can.
Yeah, I think one of the popular examples within Amazon is actually held to be the launch of Prime as a program. I think there are enough articles that have been written that Prime as a program, when it was first present, and just for those of you who don't know Prime, it's a loyalty program. Customers pay a certain fee upfront to be Prime members on Amazon. And because of that, they get some future benefits whenever they buy a transaction, whenever they buy something. If Amazon were to charge 2 days or fast delivery, some extra amount, it is waived for such people. Yeah? And then of course you get video benefits, you can watch movies for free, etc. So when the first concept of Prime was proposed and people did the whatever the Excel financial workings, etc., it did not make sense. But I think Jeff Bezos took that call that no, there is merit in building a program that will induce stickiness, and once you have that stickiness, you can sort of accelerate the flywheel further and get them to come back again and again and again to shop on Amazon, and it'll be worth it, is the point he made. So that's one example. But even otherwise, I think there are plenty of examples I can relate to from my marketing partnership days, finance partnership days with my marketing colleagues. We had a product which had to be launched in response to a certain competitor's launch. And we knew that the competitor had dropped prices, and our product offering, we would not be able to match or even make positive margins at the price at which we were proposing to launch that particular product. So the dilemma was always do something versus do nothing kind of a thing. But then the right people took the call that even though your margins are bad, they said, and even though the data might suggest something else, it's important to make sure that you capture your customer, and it's kind of obvious once you do that. And over a period of time, you will then make changes in your product as you get the critical mass to be able to get more value, squeeze down costs, and then maybe build value-added products on top of it. Maybe a new brand or a sub-brand can be launched once you have that franchise. So that was again a gut decision. But it's always good when you hire people to ask them, give me an example where you were confused whether to follow data or to follow your gut, and then see what kind of examples they tell you. And that gives you the conclusion whether they're comfortable, but they know when to set aside data to use intuition. Okay, thank you very much.